Thank you guys for leading our worship tonight, and thank you all for being here with us this evening. Before we start, let me say that I'm going to try and get us out a little bit early. I intend to abide by the philosophy that the oil drillers use in public speaking, which is if you don't strike oil in 20 minutes, quit boring. Let that sink in for a minute. We're in oil country. That should make sense. I want you to look at this picture as we begin, and I want you to tell me, by a show of hands, how many of you see the train moving away from you? How many of you see it moving toward you? How many of you saw it change directions? Can you make it change directions by focusing on the picture? If you stare at it long enough, that's possible. And it may take a second. You can make it change directions, but if you really focus, if you really put your mind to it, you can turn that train around just back and forth. It almost stops. It just moves back and forth very quickly. Our minds are very, very powerful. Okay, don't give me a seizure. Let's move on. Our minds are very powerful. And as I was preparing for this series, and I'm so glad we're doing it, it's such an important topic, I looked up the definition of mind control, and it is this: subverting an individual's control of his or her mind by means of psychological tactics. It's manipulation, brainwashing, mental control, and coercive persuasion. Several years ago, there was an article in the Washington Post about a growing number of Americans that believe that our own government is intentionally sending information and ideas and voices into the heads of our citizens. They have websites, they have message boards, they have conferences. They probably look like this. They call themselves, no, I'm serious, they call themselves targeted individuals. They believe that they are targeted individuals, that our government's trying to manipulate them by beaming thoughts into their minds. I don't know about that. I mean, I like a conspiracy as much as the next guy. But there is a force on this earth that is trying to manipulate you and intimidate you. And one of his greatest tools is by planting thoughts in your mind. Paul says in 2 Corinthians 2:11, and we do this. He's talking about forgiveness. We forgive others, and you need to allow that to happen as a person who's being forgiven. We do this so that we may not be outwitted by Satan, for we are not ignorant of his designs. Some versions say schemes. We are not ignorant of Satan's schemes. Paul says you and I are targeted individuals. Satan is playing by those old rules from the Survivor show: outwit, outlast, outplay. And he knows that if he can control your mind, he can control you. But the Bible tells us Satan is a liar. He's the father of lies. He's a deceiver. And so any thought that Satan gives you is not true. Any thought that Satan gives you is not true. And the problem is that we can be so deceived that we don't even realize we're deceived. It's like George Costanza from Seinfeld said, it's not a lie if you believe it. That's how bad it can get. Satan can lie to our face, and we don't even realize we're being played and manipulated and influenced. And I think Satan comes for our minds because he understands this principle: your thoughts lead you somewhere. Your thoughts lead you somewhere. Another way to say it is, ideas have consequences. I love the way preacher Buddy Bell puts it. Your train of thought determines your destination. Your train of thought determines your destination. If Satan can plant a lie or a thought into your mind that you're not able to let go of, he can determine your destination. And the ultimate destination that he wants for you is your destruction. Think about this lie. It's prevalent today. It's one of the most insidious lies that he'll plant in your mind when you're married. And it's this: if we're not happy, we must not be right for each other. If I'm not happy, then you must not be the person for me. And so the moment you become unhappy, you say to yourself, well, we're not right for each other. And if we're not right for each other, I don't have to live up to my commitments. And if I don't have to live up to my commitments and it's not going to get any better, we might as well just get divorced and move on. And then Satan gets what he wants: the end of your marriage. And some of you, though you're not married, you've seen this unfold in your parents' relationship and marriage. But it often starts with a lie that Satan plants in our minds. It's the lie that says, I can't be happy as long as fill in the blank. I can't be happy as long as I'm at this school. I can't be happy as long as I have this job or I don't have that job. I can't be happy as long as I'm in this relationship. I can't be happy as long as he's my roommate or she lives in my apartment. That's Satan convincing you that you can't have joy. And so if your joy begins to be dependent on your circumstances, the destination is going to be a life of misery, a life without joy. I see this a lot in our college students. They'll come to a new school year and they'll make a very strong determination. I am going to have a better semester. I'm going to get better grades. I'm going to do my homework. I'm going to go to class. And they start off really well. They start going to class and then they miss one. And then they miss another one. And then an assignment. And then another one. And then they tell themselves, well, I might as well not go anymore. I can't seem to be consistent. That's Satan's lie. He wants you to give up. And it's not just school, it's our whole lives. He wants to destroy your life. One of his favorite times to come to you is after you've messed up, after you've sinned. And one of his favorite starting places is with thoughts of condemnation. When you say to yourself, I can't do it. Following Jesus is too hard. I might as well give up. I'm just stuck with this sin. And if you're willing to go there with him, he's going to plant a bigger lie next. It's the one that says, what you've done is so awful. It's so terrible. How could God possibly love you? How could he possibly forgive you for that? Think about where that train of thought would lead a person. Satan is so good because he understands this principle. But Paul understands it too. And so listen to what he says in Romans chapter 8 and verse 5. Those who live according to the flesh have their minds set on what the flesh desires. But those who live according to the Spirit have their minds set on what the Spirit desires. You see, Paul understands that there are only two directions. There's one train track, and you've got to go one direction or the other. It's either with the flesh or it is with the Spirit. And all Satan has to do is get you to change directions. Because the train of your thought determines your destination. Satan is coming for your thought life. And there's a reason for that. There's a reason that that is what he's targeting in your life. It is because nobody sees it. Nobody knows what's going on as you think. I don't know how many, don't raise your hand to this question. How many of you have a place where you stash stuff when people are coming over to your house? A closet, a basement, the laundry room, a spare bedroom. Some of you have no idea what the normal people in this room are talking about, and we despise you for it. When I was a kid, it was under my bed, and I could fit nearly everything I owned under my bed, and that was fine until my mom looked under the bed, and then I had to clean it up. Not long after Rachel and I were married, a younger couple, another couple invited us over. There were several couples that were coming over to this other couple's house for dinner, and the wife asked me to go to their laundry room and go to the dryer and get a dish towel out of it. And so I did. I went to the dryer in the laundry room and I opened it up, and inside were a stack of dirty pots and pans that she never expected anybody to see. She had forgotten to wash the dish towel, but the dirty pots and pans were there. We do this with our lives too. We work on the parts that are seen, and the parts that aren't seen, we don't clean up. There's accountability. So what about the things that aren't seen? Imagine for just a moment that your thought life over the last week were somehow displayed on the screens behind me. Do you think we might be more careful about what we thought about? My friend Buddy talked about a time that he moved into a new house, and this new house had a gigantic picture window in their living room. And it was a couple of weeks before they got their curtains up, and a couple of weeks later, their neighbors came over and introduced themselves to Buddy and his family. And here's what the neighbors said. They said, "Our kids have just loved sitting on our front lawn and watching TV through your window." That's some accountability, isn't it? He said it immediately cleaned up his wife's viewing habits. But that's the way we operate. If it can be seen, we work on it. But it's also what makes our minds vulnerable. We can have so much going on up there that nobody sees. So what do? How do we change directions? How do we change our thoughts and change our destination? Paul tells us in Colossians chapter 3, 1 through 4, If then you have been raised with Christ, seek the things that are above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. Set your minds on things that are above, not on things that are on the earth, for you have died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is your life, appears, then you also will appear with him in glory. The determination of your destination is where you set your mind. So set your mind on things above. You can decide. You can choose what you think about. And that sounds so easy, but if you're like me, I just kind of think what I think. It's stuff I've always thought. I'm rarely aware of what I actually think about. But what that means is we've allowed some uninvited guests to come in and stay in our minds. Just imagine if somebody knocked on your door at 3 o'clock in the morning and said, "Hey, can I come in?" Would you ask them some questions? Would you want to know why they were there? Are they there to hurt you? Are they to help you? Are they going to harm your family? You would not just let them walk in, and yet we do that with our minds. We let all kinds of ideas come in and take up space without asking any questions. If we took time to screen them, we would never let them in. Because we know if I hook my life to this thought, I can see that destination. I know where it's going, and it's not good. So think about what you think about. God has endowed us uniquely as human beings to do that. We can actually think about what we think about. So set your mind on things above. And one of the things that happens when we do that is we gain a new perspective. Sometimes we need a new perspective, don't we? Sometimes I get so busy and so consumed with all the things I've got to do that I lose perspective. I love the story about a girl who was a freshman in college, and it was a number of years ago, and she had not called or written her mother in a long time, and her mom was waiting for her to get in touch with her. And finally, about this time in the semester, several weeks in, the girl wrote her mom a letter, and here's what the letter said. "Dear Mom, I'm sorry I haven't written. It's been crazy at school. We had a fire in our dorm, and I lost everything. And when the fire broke out, I had to jump out of the second floor, and I broke my leg. I didn't have anywhere to go, but the fireman that carried me to the ambulance came to the hospital, and when I got out, he let me stay at his place. He's really nice. In fact, I'm expecting his child. You're going to be a grandma. Love, Susan. P.S. Mom, none of the above is true, but I do have a D in psychology, and I'm flunking history. I just wanted you to receive this news in its proper perspective." Paul wants us to have the proper perspective, and heaven gives us that. We're able to see this world in a different way because we understand it differently. Paul says in Corinthians, we regard no one from a worldly point of view. We don't get so wrapped up and anxious about all the things that other people get worked up about. I heard this unusual story about a business traveler that was a frequent traveler, and one afternoon he was on a flight, and a woman came and sat down next to him, and she noticed that the first class seat he was sitting in was really nice. Like the leather was a little bit plusher than everyone else's. It had a footrest. It reclined a little bit further. The screen in front of him was quite a bit bigger. The food he got was better. And finally she asked him, she said, "How did you get this seat?" And he said, "Well, I paid for it." She said, "Why would you do that?" He said, "Well, it's my home." And a lot of us have the same mentality about this home. What should be temporary, we consider very permanent. What should be a transportation place becomes what we hold on to. We've forgotten the perspective that all this is going to go away someday. It's going to give way to something eternal. And so Paul tells us, set your minds on things above, not on earthly things. As we wrap up, let's do a little self-diagnosis this evening. Ask yourself this question: what is my mind set on? Am I heavenly minded? And here's a test. Could something be taken away from you? A person? A place? Maybe a dream or a possession? And if it was taken away from you, would you feel like you wouldn't have life anymore? I've heard this, and sometimes I've been tempted to say it. If this were to happen, if that person were to leave, if I were to lose that possession, if I were to lose that position, my life would feel like it was over. And so whatever it may be, if it's that thing or that job or that major or even that person, if it means that much to you, I think Paul would say to us, you need to make Christ your life. As Paul reminds us, for you died, and your life is now hidden with Christ in God. And so tonight, if you have not died to yourself, to the ways of living that only serve yourself, if you haven't been buried in baptism, if you haven't surrendered to God and been raised in a new life, then you can't say, as Paul does, Christ is my life. But you can change that. You can say that. You can come tonight, you can be baptized, you can surrender your life to God, and you can be raised a new person, a completely new person. If you've known that life before and Satan's led you away with his lies, God wants to welcome you home, wants to welcome you back, and so do we. So whatever need you have tonight, come forward as we stand and sing.